how does the church family in Europe grow? Europe faces many, many challenges. I think probably we've got to start with a biblical foundation of what do we believe God has promised his church. Now, I believe that there are many promises in the Bible, many Old Testament prophecies that, yes, had an immediate context, but also had a future context. For example, Isaiah chapter 2, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord will be established as chief among the mountains. Many people will run to it saying, come, let us go up to the house of the Lord. Now that's talking about the church. That's a picture of the church. And there's nothing in human history yet that has come anywhere close to that being fulfilled. Therefore, it must lay in the future. And therefore, it's ahead of me. And it's ahead of the church now. It may be in our generation. It may not be. But it's coming. And so I think a great deal of confidence theologically, doctrinally, needs to be in us. Jesus has promised that the church is growing, not shrinking. The image of those mountains means that every philosophical argument, every economical argument, every political argument, every ism that's ever been known to man, every dominating principle that has governed human thinking will in the end be dwarfed by the majesty and the glory of God's church in the earth. I believe that. And I think we have to start with, what does the Bible say? Do we believe it? Jesus is looking for faith. He's looking for people who believe what he said. I think it's Jonathan Edwards who said, the things that God has made the abundant subject of his promises, God's people must make the abundant subject of their prayers. So we've firstly got to start with believing what God has said about the future. Then we've got to pray it into being. And one of the great things I believe that we can do across the nations of Europe is see a rise in the culture of corporate prayer across all the churches, because prayer should be the driving engine of everything we do. It shouldn't be a department. It should be the engine, the culture, the air that we breathe. One of the things we've been involved in the network of churches that I'm part of, although we're now seeing it spread to many other networks now looking to join in with us, is we tried to emulate what Jonathan Edwards did some years ago and have concerts of prayer. We've developed something called the Enough Prayer Initiative, and we're 3 times a year now, many thousands gather for half nights of prayer. We do it 3 times a year, so in multiple locations, we're all praying at the same time and all praying for the same thing. And our vision is to see many thousands joining in with those occasions. We're just one of a number of initiatives that's been happening. And across Europe at the moment, my observation would be corporate prayer is beginning to have a resurgence. And the reason that's happening is I believe the Spirit of God is beginning to stir the church to pray. Whenever the church prays, evangelism always is the outcome. So I think before we come up with any strategies of how we're going to turn the tide of secularism and humanism and come up with arguments that can hold their own against the tide of unbelief that Europe is facing, I think press pause on that, give ourselves to a culture of corporate prayer, because that will soften the ground like rain falling from heaven, into which our apologetics, our preaching, our gospel presentation will find effectiveness that it didn't have before we prayed. So we need to believe God's promises, we need to pray like crazy, and the third thing is we need to plant churches. The church is God's plan A. All our energy should be in planting local churches in villages, towns, cities, in every nation of Europe. So we need to raise up church planters, we need to learn good principles, biblical principles of how we plant church, what local church should look like so that it grows and flourishes and becomes all that it can be. These are the big things: believing God, praying corporately, planting churches.